Good morning, Dan and Amy. And over the weekend, reports of a massive data leak coming out of the Chinese Communist regime that details really the infiltration of Chinese Communist operatives around the globe. And I'm not just talking about Eric Swalwell's girlfriends. This coming to us from Sky News Australia that provided some of the detail.
Amid rising tensions in the Australia-China relationship, there has now been a major leak of official records from the Chinese Communist Party. It is believed to be the first leak of its kind in the world. A register with the details of nearly 2 million Communist Party members. It includes their name, party position, birth date, national ID number, ethnicity, and in some cases, even their phone number. What's amazing about this database is not just that it exposes people who are members of the Communist Party and who are now living and working all over the world, from Australia to the US to the UK, but it's amazing because it lifts the lid on how the party operates under President and Chairman Xi Jinping. But this leak shows that party branches are embedded in some of the world's biggest companies and even inside government agencies. That's right, Communist Party branches have been set up inside Western companies, allowing the infiltration of those companies by CCP members who, if called on, are answerable directly to the Communist Party, to the chairman, the president himself.
So in terms of intellectual property theft, that's one issue. But, of course, the national security implications are even bigger. That reporter for Sky News Australia also provided the detail on the chain of custody of this leaked information and, how many different looks and verifications it went through before the reporting.
The data was extracted from a Shanghai server by Chinese dissidents, whistleblowers, in April 2016, and they've been using it for counterintelligence purposes since then. It was then leaked in mid-September to the newly formed international bipartisan group, the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, and that group's made up of 160 legislators around the world. It was then given to an international consortium of 4 media organisations, The Australian, The Sunday Mail in the UK, The Standard in Belgium, and a Swedish editor to analyse over the past 2 months. And that's what we've done.
And this re-raises the interview that CBS News' Catherine Herridge did of Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe the other week. She posted over the weekend, for emphasis, an extended clip from that interview that speaks to when Ratcliffe briefed members of Congress about his assessment on the threat that China poses to national security.
You wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, and you say China is targeting members of Congress with 6 times the frequency of Russia and 12 times the frequency of Iran. What is behind Beijing's aggressive approach?
So they want laws and policies out of the United States that are favorable to China. And what they're really trying to do is, through blackmail, through bribery, through overt and covert influence, trying to make sure that only laws that are favorable to China are passed.
Have you been to Capitol Hill, and have you briefed this threat information to lawmakers?
I was so troubled by what I saw from the position as the Director of National Intelligence that I went and briefed both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees on this information, which they found surprising and troubling. But that's part of alerting members of Congress to the threats that they're facing and that the American people are facing in this broad campaign that China has to replace the United States as the world superpower.
When did you brief those 2 intelligence committees?
Earlier this summer.
And they dutifully then ignored that briefing, apparently, and waited for Axios to break the story about the sort of Chinese influence operations that were ongoing, as we talked about last week, with potentially Eric Swalwell and others being compromised. And I cannot wait for more analysis to be done on the 2 million individuals that were disclosed and just exactly what positions they occupy in the West in general and in America in particular. More on this topic. We're pleased to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of books including Wiki at War and Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good to be with you.
Give us your perspective on the importance of this data leak.
Well, how many hours do you have?
Yeah, right.
Look, first of all, I do. Even though she described how this information was shared, it still has to be, I think, if the U.S. is going to act on it, they have to look at it and verify it and everything else, because there's still opportunities to manipulate and everything. But let's put all that aside, because first of all, this is completely consistent with what we've seen since the Chinese since 2016. When Obama went to China and said, "Hey, I want to sign a deal about you guys stop, cyber hacking," the Chinese signed a deal and they honored it. In part, they honored it because everybody was on to them, and they were in the process of reconverting their intelligence focus really to be on human intelligence, which is getting people out there and connecting with people and then trying to extract information from them or manipulate them or have them be agents of China. This is completely consistent with that. This is behavior that has been widely talked about. So, I think it is stunning to some people, but on the other hand, it's like, have you not been tracking what the Chinese have been doing the last couple of years?
Well, okay, but then now that context to the Hunter Biden investigation and the announcement last week that yes, there is this investigation ongoing. They tried to limit it to say, "Oh, it's just about my tax filings," and I'm sure everything will come out in my favor. Effectively was the statement, but it seems like it's potentially broader than that. And of course, this is also not really a surprise since there was reporting on this prior to the election. It's just a surprise to those who dutifully ignored it. But nonetheless, it implicates something much more nefarious afoot potentially than just Hunter Biden and others trying to line their pockets.
Well, I mean, I think this does show how disingenuous and duplicitous many politicians and many of our leaders were. When this issue broke, remember there was the Democrats quickly rushed out a letter from 65 intelligence experts that, "Oh, this is just Russian disinformation," even though we factually know they had no information, no intelligence whatsoever to suggest that it was Russian disinformation. And if it was, it would have been like a plot worthy of Mission Impossible. So it was a political statement on that face. But on top of that, that the Democratic leaders that were in the Intelligence Committee, in the House, in the Senate, in the know, they all know what the Chinese are doing, and that this is consistent with that behavior. Nobody's saying Hunter Biden is a criminal or a spy or a traitor, but these activities are consistent with Chinese efforts at manipulation, and it was a legitimate story, and it was suppressed intentionally by the press, even though there was every bit of evidence to suggest that it was a legitimate story. And, you mentioned Catherine Herridge. I got to say, one of the few real national security reporters out there with incredible talent and incredible integrity, and one of the few people doing real serious reporting at the national level on these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I can completely agree. It was Fox's loss when she moved over to CBS. We've talked to her many times on this show. She's excellent. Just sticking on Hunter Biden for a second, more information trickling out now that people are acknowledging this is an actual story. Email to the manager of his Washington, D.C. office building in September of 2017 asking her to make keys for his office mates. That would include the big guy. It would also include a guy named Gong Wendong, who was identified as the emissary for the chairman of the Chinese energy conglomerate CEFC, who Biden was doing business with, received $5 million, and so on and so forth, as Tony Bobulinski, his former business partner, detailed. But again, now you're bringing a Chinese communist-backed energy company's top people over into access to whatever's going on in Biden-Obama world in D.C. in September of 2017, including with potentially Joe Biden himself. I mean, the specter has been raised again of a special counsel and whether or not Barr should appoint a special counsel to investigate the whole Biden Inc. matter before the turnover in the administration potentially. And I wonder what your perspective on that is.
Well, I'd like to go back about why, so we don't jump too fast, why this should have been an issue that everybody should recognize was a real potential issue even before the election. And that is that fundamental to the Chinese Communist Party's way of operating, and an idea we've talked about on the show before, it's this notion of civil-military fusion, that every element of Chinese society is responsible to the Chinese Communist Party. So whether you're a Communist Party member or you're related to somebody in the Communist Party or you're an employee of the Chinese government, you are essentially potentially a tool of the Chinese government. So even without this list, we know that potentially millions and millions of Chinese individuals around the world could be blackmailed or taking orders from the Chinese Communist Party, certainly anyone involved in a Chinese company. And so when this issue was raised, there should have been automatically a concern of a counterintelligence risk, and it should have been investigated. Look, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the bar is to trigger a legal investigation. I don't know what the FBI has, what the CIA has, what there is in the counterintelligence front. But clearly, there was a public effort on the part of the political opposition and on mass media to bury this story so it wouldn't damage the Biden presidency. Clearly, the government in a way was kind of, well, you're on the one hand you have, we don't compromise ongoing investigations and everything else, but on the other hand, how do we do this and not just be seen as a political tool of the president going after his enemy? So it creates this very difficult situation. But here's the people who know this and love this. The Chinese Communist Party, they know how our system operates. That's what Radcliffe said was so important. They know how our system works, and they're looking how to leverages the weaknesses in our system in order for us to be the in the famous words of Ghostbusters, the instruments of our own destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I didn't think I'd get a Ghostbuster citation from you today, but that's very nicely done.
Well, speaking of the Chinese, Eric Swalwell, do you think, at the very least, he should step down from the House Intelligence Committee or be removed from that since he got played by a Chinese spy for years and even hired one of her interns or made one of her friends an intern?
I think that's an issue. The Congress, in a sense, polices its own rules. But here's the deal is he was one of the lead attackers of the president and the biggest purveyors of Russian disinformation. Knowing how political people are targeted and how they are attempted to be manipulated, he went after the president of the United States knowing that he himself was subject to the same kind of attacks. I think his performance was despicable, and I think it completely lacks integrity. So I think he has a lot to answer for. I think that's clearly true.
With respect to China, it seems to me like so many have learned nothing from the Cold War. I mean, what the Chinese are doing seems to me like a 2.0 version of what the Soviets did for generations with sleeper agents and the like. Is that a fair comparison?
Well, the difference is the Chinese have a lot more resources. They have a lot more assets, and they have a lot more avenues of attack. So in some ways, it is a threat that is much more pernicious than the Soviet threat. I mean, we lost John LeClaire this week, and you can go catch Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy before it leaves Netflix. But I mean, the Russians, even though America was a very open society compared to the Soviet Union, I mean, it was not easy to place these assets and to manipulate them. Compared to what the Chinese, I mean, this is the difference between trying to get to England in a rowboat and the D-Day invasion. I mean, we are literally being invaded by China. But here's the deal: this is not new. It's been going on for like at least 6 or 7 years that they've had a major human campaign against the United States.
No, well, that's sort of what I mean. This is exponentially more textured their war against America, if you will, their war for hegemony. It seems like we're starting from the reinvention of the wheel rather than what we learned from our combat over 80 years with the Russians, 70 years.
Well, and here's a key point: is when you're doing counterintelligence investigations and criminal prosecutions, you want to focus on real threats. So it's easy to run out there and say, let's just shut down every Chinese takeout restaurant. You have to focus assets on the most serious threats. And here's the problem with people who literally have been playing politics with this issue for years, they make it even more difficult, because when you're doing legitimate things, they say, oh, that's politics. And then on the other hand, the more they try to obfuscate, the more people are suspicious of everything. So really, the partisanship has really, really, really poisoned this effort. And we have to take this effort seriously. It's bigger than Republicans and Democrats. It literally is the safety and the freedom and prosperity of Americans that's at risk here.
And by the way, since you mentioned John le Carre and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, of course, you were referring to the BBC series where Alec Guinness stars, as opposed to, even though Gary Oldman was great in the movie version, you got to watch the BBC series, don't you? Would you agree?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President, Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, and George Smiley fan. Lieutenant Colonel Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
After 25 years of building websites for all kinds of companies in many different industries, AmericanEagle.com realized a well-designed website is also your best employee, bringing efficiency, revenue, production, showing up every day, giving above and beyond to increase your bottom line. That's what a website designed, developed, and hosted by AmericanEagle.com has brought to so many clients. An AmericanEagle.com website is a 24/7 branding exercise, building rapport and thus brand equity while you sleep. Companies like WeatherTech have relied on AmericanEagle.com's website design and development and hosting capabilities for years. When some of the world's top brands need a reliable company to prepare their sites for high-traffic events, who do they call? AmericanEagle.com. Their clients have come to rely on them for a full line of website services, from consulting and strategy to digital marketing, hosting, and maintenance. Give the team at AmericanEagle.com a call today. 1-877-WEB-NOW. The number 1 is the number. AmericanEagle.com is the website. 1-877-WEB-NOW. 1 is the number.
Doing it every morning. So is my mom. So are Peyton and Eli. That's taking Balance of Nature. Why? Well, we, like many of you, want a strong, healthy immune system, and that's why I take Balance of Nature. We've had doctors on the show that say get enough sleep, exercise, and eat a well-balanced diet. But who's really doing that? The creator of Balance of Nature, Dr. Howard, said 70% of the produce we buy ends up in the garbage can. So here's what you do. It's 6 capsules of 10 servings of 31 different fruits and veggies, vitamin D, vitamin C, potassium.